rising prices are affecting all kinds of consumer behaviors, and it would be an injustice for us to talk about anything else without first addressing some of the changes that consumers are handling or dealing with as a result of the ongoing inflationary pressures that they're feeling. Touching on this, it impacts all kinds of things. And not only is it impacting behaviors, but it's actually warping, to a certain extent, consumers' thinking, aspirations, how they feel emotionally, and that translates into certain things that impact brands and behavior and society in general. So that's why we're going to spend the first part of our presentation on that particular topic. Now, on the left part of this slide, you see some of the ways that inflation has really affected consumers, whether it be from, causing confidence to be very much shaky. There are fears and even feeling that recessions has already taken place, that we're already in it. Consumers are looking at purchases with a great deal of scrutiny, in some cases delaying or reducing the number of purchases that they're making. And they're being forced to really make changes and considerations about the brands that they buy as well, or in the retail channels that they're going to make purchases through to try and save money and deal with these very large increases in prices. So thinking about it, and we're going to dive into each one of these a little bit deeper. So we'll start at the highest level here, kind of that macroeconomic kind of level, and see that, economic concerns are high and have been for some time. This 84% figure that we see cited here is nothing new. It has pretty much remained in that level for for a number of months now. And a vast majority of consumers, because of this, are in fact changing their behaviors. And you see some of those things highlighted here on the right-hand side of this slide. Over 3/4 are taking steps to prepare for what is already believed to be a recession that is fairly imminent, whether that be paying down debt that they had, or did they cut back on their holiday spending, or trying to allocate more towards savings to deal with things. And we've even seen that behavior change already as this data was pulled back in September, that savings rates have already started to decline as consumers kind of did continue to spend, but they kind of tapped into the savings that had built up over the pandemic period. And in fact, the personal savings rate in the United States decreased to just 2.3% in October, and that is the lowest figure since 2005. So the rising prices are definitely having an impact. Now, as it relates to consumer sentiment, and which is really translated into concern, there's been a lot written and said about consumer sentiment, and you can find no shortage of sentiment indices or graphs that track this over the amount of time. But I think what you would find in looking at all of them is that they pretty much show that concern has risen. Have data here from a very recent release from Numerator that shows that 44%, so just under half of people, are citing personal finances as their top concern out of anything in the entire world right now. Nearly 80% believe that inflation is still going to rise, despite the fact that it has decreased over the last few months. The expectations are that it might come back again. 7 in 10 think that the U.S. economy is going to worsen over the next few months. And 6 in 10 are not comfortable making purchases on non-essential items. So paints a very concerning picture for what consumer behavior and spending will be like moving into 2023. And we saw that in some of the behaviors as well. Kind of felt on the next slide, first we kind of first saw this happening in the middle part of last year, where consumers started to feel pinched by things. And I wanted to share this particular piece of data because it showed the breadth of how the rising costs were affecting things, whether it be in apparel or healthcare or even education and gym membership costs. There was a wide swath of categories here that people were feeling and noticing changes in prices. And not only were they feeling that feeling was translating then into behavior. And on the next slide, we start to see some of those responses that started to happen towards the second half of last year. And the data on these charts are showing two types of responses that consumers had. On the left side, we see some of the habits that were changed, and on the right, we see where some of the categories that consumers were looking to make cuts or changes in most specifically. And while the data here is showing comparisons kind of from mid-year, early and mid-year, tracking this information from other various sources, we see that a lot of these same things have continued right through the end of 2022 and into the beginning of 2023, so that people are, in fact, buying less overall, or when it comes to groceries and things, they are looking at buying more private label brands in order to save money. And that's translated into cutting back on overall grocery expenditures, as well as expenditures for dining out and anticipating cutting back on travel as well. The more recent data showed some of the cuts from more of a retail perspective and shows a little bit more detail. And what you can see on this slide from the data here is that 1/3 or more of consumers in this October survey said they are very likely to cut back across 7 of the 8 categories listed here, ranging from anything like tech and electronics to houseware and beauty items. So 1/3 of consumers looking to cut back across 7 very broad categories. And even in alcohol, which was ironically the category that people thought they were going to least likely to cut back on, but even that nearly 1/3 of people are saying they're looking at the purchases within that particular category and saying, I don't know if I can continue purchasing at the same rate there as well. Since we have some of our Hornland clients on our call here, I greatly appreciate that. Wanted to highlight some data points within categories that are very relevant to them. Whether it be within the grocery sector, where again, over 20% of people are looking at planning cuts there. In the travel sector, where again here you can see 1/3 either putting plans on hold or canceling things altogether. People taking a hard look at all of their services and subscriptions, like their phone carriers. 1 in 5 there looking at potentially switching carriers. You know, while this was done ahead of the holidays, nearly 1/4 saying that they were going to cut back a bit on the very least, probably the number of gifts, if not their actual spend, because of the increase in prices associated with those items. And when it comes to bigger ticket items like cars, again, nearly 1 in 5 looking at putting those purchases on hold, delaying them, or canceling them altogether. Now, the behavior changes are not universal across all of the income ranges. So we had mentioned one of those ingrained behaviors that we've been tracking in prior years, bifurcated spending. And we kind of see that here in that the behavioral shifts that are happening among consumers in response to inflation are a little bit different based on your income levels. And that's not surprising. Everyone is looking to save or do something to improve their situation in a certain way, but they may be doing it in a different way. I just wanted to highlight a couple things here that compare the lowest income ranges that this particular source had, households with under $50,000 in income. So those are more middle income, 50 to 100,000 range. And as you can see, shopping at discount stores was more likely to be something that those in the lowest income bracket were looking to do, whereas consolidating driving trips was something that middle income person was trying to do, or if they were ordering online and getting things shipped to them, they're trying to avoid shipping costs. So they were still spending, but they were looking to maybe shave the total cost of their expenditures down a little bit by saving on any shipping costs that they would incur while shopping. That's kind of where we've been. So the big question is like, what can we expect kind of moving forward? What's ahead? And on the next slide, we see one person who's going to have kind of a big impact on that, and that is the Federal Reserve Chairman Powell and the Fed overall. what they've said is that we are committed to and will succeed in getting inflation down to 2%. Right now, even with the latest figures, that number is still over 7%, so there's a long way to go. Increases in the interest rates are still very likely, and all indications out of Federal Reserve Board notes from the most recent meeting seem to indicate that. And as Chairman Powell kind of indicated months ago, the process is likely to bring inflation under control is likely to be very painful for some, but that failing to do so and allowing inflation to become more persistent would be even worse. And so they do intend to continue with the steps, and that will continue to affect consumers. How do the people feel about the Fed's action so far, and will they be successful in balancing that tightrope between, kind of bringing inflation under control without kind of triggering a larger recession? Well, if you ask consumers, and that's what this source did earlier last year, most people don't think that's going to be the case. In fact, their confidence between May and September actually decreased quite a bit, with people's opinions about the continued rate hikes decreasing from in a positive kind of atmosphere from 41% to 30%. So they're not optimistic that the Fed will be successful in terms of things without causing a good bit of harm to the consumers in general. Also looking ahead, while this hadn't been so much of a concern, and why people thought this heading towards a recession was a little bit different this time around, was the employment sector. Employment in the country was still fairly strong, but towards the end of last year, we did see quite a bit of job cuts announced, especially in tech sector and some other areas. Some companies that had never really announced layoffs in the past, like Amazon and even Netflix. And those figures were up quite a bit in November and continued to have announcements in December as well. So employment, even which had been kind of the one strong point of the overall economy, may be softening a bit as we enter into first and second quarter of 2023. And that obviously is not a good thing in terms of consumer spend, and that if that is to increase. And there's very likelihood that, a recession is kind of imminent. In fact, I think it was a Bloomberg group of economists had raised their projections of a recession happening in 2023 at some point to nearly 100%. So one thing we did want to share in that event is, okay, well, how do we respond if consumers are going to be pulling back, if a recession is inevitable? What can we do about it from an advertising and marketing standpoint? And these recommendations come from WARC, the World Advertising Research Council, and we thought we'd share those. We have information on each one of these, and we'd be happy to share them with you if you'd like to reach out and ask about that. I'm only in the aspect of time, I'm going to dive into one of these, which I found, kind of most critical as far as our response goes, and talk about that now. And that is the one in the upper right there, going dark, or cutting back on your advertising investment absolutely hurts your long-term ROI, and does it in a very concrete way. On this next slide, you can see this is information. This isn't just ad agency speak or anything like that. This was analysis performed by Analytic Partners, someone who might be very familiar to some folks on this particular webinar, a media mix modeling firm, well respected, well known. And their analysis of prior recession data and response indicated these particular points that I've highlighted here on the right-hand side of the slide. Those brands that were able to maintain, or even better yet, increase spend during the last recession actually saw a huge increase in their ROI, and that those who did it were able to raise their outlays, saw an even bigger increase. That recorded ROI wasn't just a short-term thing, it extended over a multi-year period, and that the incremental growth as a result of that investment was nothing to sneeze at all with that 17% for the brands that were able to do that. It's very easy for someone, I guess, in marketing or advertising to say maintain your advertising investment when things are tough. But the one other thing that I'd point out from the other slide to focus in on is that even maintaining budgets during these tough times actually allows you to potentially increase your share of voice if others are starting to cut back within your category. So at the very least, we want to look at maintaining our spend in these rough times and do as things go forward.